For Poland, the 19th century was a century of struggle for independence, and thus a century which for Poles did not end until the 11th of November 1918, when a new, independent Poland emerged from the ashes of the First World War. This is the story of how the 1905 revolution led, as those of 1830 and 1863 had not, to independence, and of the emergence of Józef Pilsudski as the leader of a reborn Poland. For Poland, the 19th century was a century of struggle for independence, and thus a century which for Poles did not end until the 11th of November 1918, when a new, independent Poland emerged from the ashes of the First World War. This is the story of how the 1905 revolution led, as those of 1830 and 1863 had not, to independence, and of the emergence of Józef Pilsudski as the leader of a reborn Poland. Welcome to Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. And we're continuing our series of looking at all things rebellious and revolutionary. We started with the 1830 revolution in Poland, the uprising. We then went on to the 1863 uprising. And now we're going to start with the 1905 revolution in Russia, which led on to a series of events, ultimately, at the end of the First World War, seeing the re-emergence of Poland as an independent country. And I'm joined in the studio by our resident expert, Dominik Szczęsny-Kostanecki. Dominik, welcome. In history, of course, it's always difficult to know where something begins and where something else ends. But I think for the purpose of today's story, we can start with the Russian Revolution of 1905, which I think gave rise to changes in the Russian Empire, which ultimately allowed the Poland to re-emerge at the end of the First World War. I mean, would you agree that's a good starting point?
Yes. We may call the 1905 revolution, both in Russia and in its Polish part, that is to say the western part of the Russian Empire, which was the so-called, let us repeat, the Congress Kingdom, or the Kingdom of Poland, which was a small entity, but the name existed. Of course, it was under the Russian rule. Other provinces, let us repeat, were under Austrian and Prussian rule. So we still have, in 1905, we have these three partitioning powers. So Russia, Prussia and Austria. But these events we are to discuss happen in Russia. And we can say that the 1905 revolution is the general for the Russians, for the Russian revolutionary movement, which is not unified. You've got different parties, but let's say the revolutionary movement, it was the general rehearsal before 1917, so the Bolshevik Revolution. At some point in 1905, Lenin said, so the leader of the Bolshevik movement, said that because at some point the Tsar Nicholas II now agreed to liberalize the system a bit, but at some point Lenin said that the war is, the struggle is not over, and we have to wait until better circumstances, that is to say, the First World War, when everything was collapsing, and the final revolution, the final attack on the Tsarism was possible.
Yes, and I think, wasn't it later that Lenin said, after the 1917 revolution, the 1917 revolution wouldn't really have been possible without the 1905, which is sort of, in a funny sort of way, a dress rehearsal, I mean, for what came later, including even the event of the sort of shooting of people at the palace in St. Petersburg, when there was this misunderstanding, and people marched on the palace.
You mean Bloody Sunday?
Bloody Sunday, yes.
Not the one in Londonderry in 1972.
No, well, exactly, yes.
It's another. No, it's the first Bloody Sunday, we may say. Okay, let us draw the context, because why 1905? I mean, things don't happen just like this.
Of course not.
I mean, it's a major event. Why 1905? In 1904, so just a year before, we've got this war between Russia and Japan. There is this a part of land next to Korea, let's say, and Manchuria, which became a promising and a very attractive land for both parties, so both for Russia and for Japan. So a rivalry started over these lands. And when Russia annexed Manchuria, Japan declared war on Russia. Everybody in St. Petersburg was laughing. So that, I mean, this little country that soon emerged from, medieval times, I mean, it will be a landslide victory. Yes. Over this little country. But it turned out that the Japanese army was well trained and scored a number of victories over the Russian antediluvian army that was, dating back to the previous times. I mean, nothing much changed after in terms of military reforms after the Crimean War. We are talking about last time. We were talking
but I think
about.
It's fair to say that this was actually the Japanese victory over Russia was the first time a non-European army had beaten a European army, which of course no doubt led lots of people to think, aha, the Europeans are not invincible as we'd all suppose them to be, which probably also gave people encouragement.
That's what you said. That's a classic sentence from historical books. This is classics. But as much as it is, a classic, it is true. And of course, the news coming from the Eastern Front was received very badly in St. Petersburg, in Moscow. Besides the situation, we often say that the workers' movement was very weak in Russia. It wasn't weak. The thing is that a small percent of the population was working as workers compared to, let's say, England or France or Germany. England and Germany, so the most industrialized societies. So out of, let's say, 30 million people inhabiting Russia, the greater Russia, let's say, so with all these, Finland, Poland, and so on, out of these 30 million, let's say 3 million were working as workers, as proper workers. So they were, the background or the basis for the revolutionary movement.
And because they'd be very much concentrated in St. Petersburg and Moscow.
St. Petersburg, Moscow, the Donbas region in Ukraine, of course Kiev, of course Odessa, European part of Russia.
And of course Warsaw, which of course at that point we have to consider as part of the Russian Empire.
We have to, unfortunately.
Yes, exactly.
As much as we don't like to do it. I mean, we have to say that.